Major Elijah Holt had been a Texas Knight for 22 years. He'd upheld the code through 3 major conflicts, 14 planetary actions, and countless skirmishes across human space. The quantum spurs integrated into his body had left their characteristic blue trails across hundreds of battlefields. In all that time, he had never executed a surrendered enemy, had never tortured a prisoner, had never targeted non-combatants. That was before the brief. That was before Clarke. That was before he watched 35,624 men and women die over 6 months of captivity. Every name etched into his memory, every face recalled with perfect clarity, every death tallied and recited silently each night before attempting sleep. A knight's enhanced neural pathways ensuring he forgot nothing, not even when he desperately wanted to. "On your feet, human," growled the guard, his obsidian skin absorbing the dim light of the cell block so completely that he seemed more shadow than substance. Only the gleam of yellow eyes and the flash of elongated fangs betrayed his presence in the darkness. Elijah didn't move from his position on the cold floor. His once powerful frame had withered during captivity, but his eyes remained sharp, calculating. The brief had taken his quantum armor, his weapons, even the integrated spurs that had been part of him for decades. They couldn't take his training or his hate. "I said on your feet." The brief slammed a shock baton against the cell's energy barrier, sending painful feedback through the field. Elijah rose slowly, deliberately. 6'4" in his prime, he still towered over most humans, though the brief guard outmassed him by at least 100 pounds of dense muscle and bone. The guard's mouth parted in what passed for a smile, revealing multiple rows of serrated fangs, designed for tearing flesh, evolutionary evidence of their predatory origin. "Commander Graysack wants the knight," the guard told his partner, tongue flicking over those deadly teeth. "Says the scientists are ready for another session." Elijah's face betrayed nothing, though his stomach clenched. He knew what session meant. They'd been trying to understand knight physiology, particularly the quantum neural integration that allowed Texas Knights to use their distinctive technology. Their methods were invasive. The energy barrier dissolved. 2 brief entered, restraints ready, confident in their physical superiority over the weakened human. Standard procedure called for 3 guards, but they'd grown complacent. Elijah had been a model prisoner, quiet, cooperative, seemingly broken. "Arms out," the first guard ordered. Elijah complied, extending his arm slowly, then exploded into motion. 22 years of night training hadn't evaporated during 6 months of captivity. His right hand struck the first guard's throat in precisely the spot where brief anatomy was vulnerable, crushing the cartilaginous breathing tube. His left hand simultaneously tore the shock baton from the guard's grasp. Before the second guard could react, Elijah had pivoted and driven the baton into the brief's eye socket with enough force to reach the brain. Both guards were dead before they hit the floor. Elijah stood motionless for 3.2 seconds. Listening for alarms, for approaching footsteps. Nothing but the distant screams of prisoners that formed the constant background noise. A camp that housed over 50,000 human prisoners of war. Pilots, Marines, Army grunts, naval crew. Regular soldiers who'd been captured in the Cygnus campaign. The captive population fluctuated as more were brought in to replace those who died under brief care. He was the only knight here. The only knight in brief captivity anywhere as far as he knew. Texas Knights didn't surrender. It was an unspoken rule, but he had broken that rule 6 months ago, surrendering himself to the brief commander Graysack after being promised that the surrounded 5th Battalion would be allowed safe passages if the knight commander gave himself up. "A knight's word is his bond," the code said. "Honor your agreements, even with enemies." The brief had no such code. The 5th Battalion was captured anyway. Over 8,000 men and women. Less than 4,000 remained alive in the camp now. The rest had joined the tally that Elijah recited silently each night. 35,624 names, faces, service numbers. Marines who died in the work gangs, pilots executed for attempted escapes, Navy techs who'd succumbed to the experiments. Elijah stripped the guards of their weapons and comm units. The night code had nothing to say about a situation like this. The brief weren't enemies who could be reasoned with or shown mercy. They were predators who understood only dominance and violence. Their evolutionary history as apex hunters had shaped a culture that viewed other species as either prey or competition to be eliminated. "No more nights," Elijah whispered to himself as he slipped into the corridor. "Not until they pay." The brief never expected a rebellion. Their psychological assessment of humans, especially the Texas Knights, had determined that they prioritized honor and rules of engagement over survival. The brief had calculated that maintaining a steady level of visible atrocity would keep the remaining prisoners compliant through fear, while occasional demonstrations of mercy would provide enough hope to prevent suicidal resistance. They had not accounted for Elijah Holt. He moved through the detention block with methodical precision, killing guards as he encountered them. No alarms had been triggered yet. He disabled the first guard's comm units before they could call for help, and each subsequent pair of guards met the same silent fate. Some cells he opened as he passed, freeing dazed prisoners who stared at him in disbelief. He didn't organize them, didn't give orders, just pointed toward the guards' bodies and the weapons there for the taking. Some understood immediately, arming themselves and continuing the work of liberating others. Some were too broken to comprehend their sudden freedom. Those he left behind, his mission wasn't rescue, it was vengeance. "Major Holt," whispered a Marine captain through the barrier of his cell. "Jesus Christ, you're alive. We thought they'd executed you weeks ago." "Not yet," Elijah replied, his voice flat as he deactivated the barrier. "Armed guards in the north corridor, 6 of them. They'll be making rounds in approximately 4 minutes. Sir, we need to coordinate the prisoners, establish a chain of command." "Do what you want, Captain," Elijah cut him off, already moving toward the next cell block. "I'm going to kill every brief in this facility." "But, sir, the night code—" "Doesn't apply anymore." Elijah continued his methodical advance through the detention blocks, leaving chaos and opportunity in his wake. The prisoners, mostly hardened combat veterans, needed little encouragement once the possibility of rebellion became apparent. Small groups formed organically, squad mates finding each other, officers taking command of whoever would follow. What had begun as one night's rampage quickly evolved into a full-scale uprising, though without central coordination. The first alarm sounded 93 minutes after Elijah killed the initial guards. By then, thousands of prisoners had been freed and over 100 brief guards killed. The predators had become prey, hunted through their own facility by vengeful humans operating in small, improvised units. When the alarm finally blared across the compound, Elijah switched tactics. No mercy, no quarter, no survivors. He muttered to himself, abandoning stealth for speed as he headed toward the camp's command center. He encountered a squad of guards rushing to respond to the alarm. In his prime, with his armor and quantum spurs, he could have defeated them without killing. Without his night equipment, bound by the code, he might have been recaptured or killed. Unburdened by the code, he was something else entirely. The first guard died before he registered the human's presence, a burst of energy fire from a stolen rifle removing most of his skull. The second and third went down in the next 2 seconds, targeted with the precision that had made Texas Knights legendary. The fourth actually managed to raise his weapon before Elijah shot him through the eye. The brief's vampire-like fangs were fearsome in close quarters, designed by evolution to puncture and rend flesh. Their preferred method of execution involved ceremonial feeding, high-ranking officers sinking those fangs into the throats of condemned prisoners. Elijah had been forced to watch countless such feedings during his captivity. Now he made sure to destroy those fangs with follow-up shots to each downed guard. a small but satisfying act of desecration. "Commander Grasact," Elijah spoke into a stolen comm unit as he stepped over the bodies. "If you can hear me, I'm coming for you." By the time Elijah reached the command center, the camp was in chaos. Freed prisoners controlled large sections of the complex, and the brief guards were fighting for their lives against overwhelming numbers of humans driven by months of accumulated hatred. No cohesive plan guided the uprising, just thousands of individual acts of rebellion and revenge that had merged into an unstoppable tide. The command center doors were sealed, but Elijah had acquired explosive charges from a fallen brief demission specialist. He placed them calmly, calculating the minimum force needed to breach the doors without bringing down the structure. The explosion ripped through the reinforced entrance, sending superheated fragments of metal into the brief defenders positioned inside. Elijah moved through the smoke before it cleared, his stolen rifle finding targets through the haze with lethal accuracy. Commander Grasact stood at the far end of the command center, his massive form dwarfing the officers around him. The brief commander was nearly 8 feet tall, his black skin gleaming like polished obsidian under the emergency lighting. His fangs were longer than those of regular brief, genetic markers of his high sight-stopping bloodline. "Knight," he growled, recognizing Elijah despite his emaciated state. "I did not expect this from you. Your kind values honor above victory." "I did," Elijah agreed, advancing steadily as he eliminated the last defenders with precise shots. "Then I watched you feed on my men after I surrendered to save them." "Those were the actions of a superior predator dealing with inferior prey," Grasact said, drawing his ceremonial blade, a curved weapon nearly 4 feet long. "You will be recaptured, Knight, and when you are, I will personally drain you dry while your heart still beats." Elijah didn't bother responding. The rifle in his hand spoke for him, sending a burst of energy fire toward the brief commander. Grasact was faster than his size suggested. He dodged sideways, the energy bolts scorching the wall behind him, and charged. Elijah fired again, catching the commander in the shoulder but failing to stop his rush. The impact of 300 kilograms of muscle and bone sent Elijah flying across the command center. His rifle skittered away, and he felt ribs crack from the collision. In his weakened state, he had no hope of matching the brief's raw strength. "You see?" Grasact sneered, advancing with his blade raised. "Without your precious armor, you are nothing but meat. Prey, like all the rest." Elijah rolled aside as the blade came down, embedding itself in the metal flooring. He lashed out with a kick to the brief's knee, striking the joint from the side where it was most vulnerable. Something snapped audibly, and Grasact roared in pain. The commander's next swing caught Elijah across the chest, opening a deep gash but missing vital organs. Blood leaked from the wound as Elijah scrambled away, searching for a weapon. His hand closed around a fallen brief's shock baton. Not ideal against a blade, but better than nothing. "I studied your kind extensively," Grasact said, limping forward. "Texas Knights, with your codes and your quantum technology, so concerned with honor that you handicap yourselves." He ran his tongue across his fangs, eyes fixed on the blood seeping from Elijah's wound. "That is why you will lose this war. That is why you will feed us." "Maybe," Elijah acknowledged, circling warily, "but you won't be there to see it." He feinted left, then dove right as Grasact committed to a powerful swing. The blade whistled overhead as Elijah rolled beneath the brief's guard and drove the shock baton upward with all his remaining strength, finding the soft tissue beneath the commander's jaw and discharging its full power directly into the brain. Grasact convulsed, blade falling from nerveless fingers, then collapsed like a mountain crumbling. Elijah stood over the twitching body, shock baton still pressed against the dying brief's throat. "The code says I should give you a clean death," he said quietly, "but I'm not a knight right now." He left the baton activated until Grasact stopped moving entirely, smoke rising from burnt flesh. Then methodically, He smashed every fang in the commander's mouth with the butt of the weapon. With the command center secured, Elijah accessed the facility's databases. He wasn't interested in coordinating the escape effort. That was happening organically throughout the camp as veteran officers regained control of their units and established evacuation plans. His sole focus was finding where they had taken his armor. The answer came quickly. A research facility 2 kilometers east of the camp. That's where they'd transported his quantum armor after capture, where they'd been attempting to reverse engineer night technology. The same facility also served as an advanced interrogation center and experimental laboratory, where thousands of human prisoners had vanished over the past months. Names flashed through Elijah's enhanced memory. Lieutenant Jessica Donaldson, Naval Intelligence, died day 47. Chief Warrant Officer Michael A. Sage, Marine Corps, died day 112. Captain Sanjay Mehta, Aerospace Force, died day 88. Thousands more who had been transferred to the research facility, never to return. All recorded in his perfect memory, part of the tally he recited each night. They would be avenged. Elijah downloaded a schematic of the research facility, noting its defenses and layout. Then he appropriated supplies from the command center's medical station, treating his own wounds with the efficiency of someone who had long experience with field medicine. As he worked, a group of freed prisoners entered the command center, a mixture of Marines and Army infantry led by a battle-scarred colonel. "Major Holt," the colonel called, approaching cautiously. "Colonel Regan, 103rd Infantry. We've secured the north quadrant and disabled the perimeter defenses. Evacuation is underway." Elijah nodded without looking up from his self-administered medical treatment. "Good. Sir, we need night expertise to coordinate—" "I'm not functioning as a night colonel," Elijah interrupted. "Do what you need to do. I have my own mission." Regan studied him for a moment, noting the flat affect, the methodical movements, the complete absence of the compassion and honor that Texas Knights were famous for. "They really broke you, didn't they?" he said softly. Elijah's hands paused briefly in their work. "No," he finally responded. "They just showed me what I really am when the code is stripped away." He secured the last bandage and stood. "Get your people out. I'm heading east to the research facility." "That's suicide, Major. That place is a fortress with at least 200 brief troops. I'm aware of the odds." Elijah gathered weapons and supplies, checking each methodically. "At least take a squad with you." "No." Elijah's voice was final. "Your job is evacuation, mine is retribution." Regan recognized the futility of further argument. "Well, if you're determined to go alone, at least take better weapons." He signaled, and one of his Marines brought forward an enhanced rifle they'd captured from a brief officer. "This has 3 times the power capacity of the standard models." Elijah accepted the weapon with a nod of thanks. "One more thing," Regan added. "When this is over, I don't know what Night Command will say about your actions today, but every prisoner in this camp owes you their life." "I didn't do it for them," Elijah said honestly. "I did it for the 35,624 who didn't make it." He slung the rifle and turned toward the exit. "And for what the brief took from me when they made me watch." The research facility rose from the forest like an alien cathedral, its black spires cutting into the moonlit sky. Elijah moved through the underbrush toward the perimeter fence, alone and focused solely on his objective. The facility's commanders knew about the camp uprising, but believed they had time to prepare. They didn't expect an immediate assault by a single man, especially not one who should have been too weak from captivity to pose a threat. They especially didn't expect Elijah Holt. The perimeter defenses were formidable. Motion sensors, automated turrets, and energy barriers designed to keep prisoners in and rescuers out. Under normal circumstances, breaching them would require a full tactical team with specialized equipment. Elijah had spent 6 months observing brief protocols and technologies. He knew their blind spots, their procedural weaknesses. More importantly, he no longer cared if he survived the mission. He approached a maintenance access point, timing his movements between automated sensor sweeps. A brief technician emerged on routine inspection, and Elijah struck with silent efficiency, taking the alien's identification and access cards before dragging the body into the underbrush. The access point admitted him to a service tunnel that ran beneath the main facility. Inside, he encountered two more technicians, both dispatched before they could raise an alarm. The tunnel led to a utility junction that connected to the main building. Elijah consulted the schematic he had memorized, orienting himself within the complex. The armor storage facility would be in the high-security wing, 3 levels up from his current position. Between him and his target waited approximately 200 brief personnel, most armed and now on high alert due to news from the prison camp. He proceeded anyway, moving with the quiet confidence of a knight who had accepted his own expendability. The first real resistance came at a security checkpoint between sections. 4 guards, all armed with heavy weapons, barred the way. Elijah didn't bother with stealth or tactics. He simply walked into view and opened fire with the enhanced rifle, cutting down 3 guards before they could properly react. The 4th managed to trigger an alarm before joining his comrades in death. Klaxons blared throughout the facility. Elijah ignored them, continuing his methodical advance. When squads of brief security forces arrived to intercept him, he engaged them with a combination of precision fire and calculated movement that maximized the structural cover available to him, while exposing his enemies to lethal crossfire. His night training had included comprehensive tactical simulations against overwhelming odds. These scenarios were meant to teach restraint and non-lethal resolution. Elijah now applied the same tactical principles, with one crucial difference. He aimed exclusively for kill shots. Level by level, corridor by corridor, he fought his way upward through the facility. The brief threw increasingly desperate forces against him, unable to comprehend how a single human could inflict such devastating losses. What they couldn't understand was that Elijah Holt was no longer fighting to win. He was fighting to punish. Each brief that fell was a small payment against the debt of 35,624 human lives. By the time he reached the high-security wing, he had exhausted his captured rifle's power cells and was using weapons taken from fallen brief. His body was functioning on pure adrenaline and conditioning, pushing through injuries that would have incapacitated a normal human. The armor storage facility doors were sealed with quantum locks, technology stolen from captured night equipment. Elijah studied the control panel, recognizing the design. He typed a complex sequence into the panel. Night command codes changed regularly, but certain master overrides remained constant, known only to knights of major rank and above. The doors resisted briefly, then slid open. Inside, his armor stood on a maintenance frame. Partial disassembly had exposed the quantum core and neural interface components, where brief scientists had been attempting to understand the technology that made knights so formidable. Most importantly, his quantum spurs rested in a shielded container, their blue energy signature muted but still visible. For the first time since his capture, Elijah felt something close to completion. He approached his armor reverently. The neural interface was damaged but functional. The quantum core had been tampered with but not destroyed. The outer plating showed signs of forced entry, where the brief had cut their way in to study the internal components. It would work. Not at full capacity, but enough. Elijah began the integration process, connecting his body's implants to the armor's systems. Pain lanced through him as damaged neural pathways reactivated, but he embraced it, used it to focus. The quantum spurs were next, their familiar energy signature flaring to life as they recognized their knight. The neural connection was rough, incomplete due to the damage, but the blue fire that traced his steps would still disrupt enemy coordination and enhance his combat capabilities. As the last components locked into place, Elijah Holt stood transformed. No longer the emaciated prisoner, but not quite the knight major he had been. Something in between. Damaged, but dangerous. He retrieved his sidearm from the equipment locker. a standard night-issue quantum pistol, and felt another piece of himself slot back into place. The facility's internal sensors would have detected the quantum energy signature of his activated armor. The brief would know exactly where he was and what had happened. They would be converging on his position with everything they had left. Good. Elijah accessed the facility's computer network through his armor's systems. He located the prisoner holding areas 2 levels below 45, where captured humans were subjected to experiments designed to understand human physiology and test biological weapons. The records showed 217 humans still alive in those chambers. His original mission had been revenge, not rescue. With his armor restored and his strength returning through the neural enhancement systems, Elijah found a fragment of his former self resurfacing. Not the night code that had been discarded beyond recovery, but the basic humanity that had led him to surrender himself in a failed attempt to save others. He set the armor's systems to bypass the facility's security and release the locks on all prisoner cells, then programmed the emergency evacuation protocols to activate, providing the captives with a potential escape route. That done, he turned his attention to the approaching brief's security forces. His armor's sensors detected 3 full squads converging on his position from different directions. Against a knight at full capacity, that would be challenging but survivable. Against his damaged armor and weakened body, the odds were significantly worse. Elisha felt his quantum spurs flare with renewed energy. The blue fire of his steps grew more intense as the armor's systems synchronized with his neural patterns, compensating for damage by routing around broken connections and establishing new pathways. "Come on, then," he whispered to the approaching forces. "Let's finish this." The battle that followed would later be classified in official night records. Witnesses would be sworn to secrecy. The Texas Night Command, upholders of honor and restraint across human space, could not acknowledge what one of their most decorated officers had done when pushed beyond the limits of his code. But the freed prisoners would tell the story anyway, of how a single knight, presumed dead after surrender, had single-handedly initiated the largest POW escape of the war, how he had killed the camp commander and then proceeded alone to the heavily fortified research facility, how he had cut a path of destruction through the brief ranks, recovering his armor and freeing the experimental subjects before destroying the facility with its own reactor core. They would speak in hushed tones of a knight who had set aside the code to become vengeance incarnate, who had recited 35,624 names to himself as he worked, a litany of the fallen driving him forward when his body should have failed. 3 days later, a battered transport ship broke atmosphere, carrying the survivors of Camp Grazat toward the human fleet waiting in the outer system. Aboard, over 48,000 former prisoners received medical treatment, food, and the first real rest they'd had in months. In the ship's small medical bay, Elijah Holt lay unconscious, his damaged armor removed, a dozen life support systems monitoring his failing body. The quantum spurs integrated into his body hummed softly, their energy signature stabilizing as the medical systems fought to save him. Colonel Reagan stood beside the bed, speaking quietly to the ship's captain. "Will he make it?" the captain asked, eyeing the knight's broken form. "The doctors aren't sure," Reagan replied. "It took hits that would have killed 10 normal men. The only thing keeping him alive is the quantum integration in his nervous system. At least that's my theory. It could also just be hate." "Night Command has sent a specialized medical team to meet us at the rendezvous point," the captain noted. "They're very interested in debriefing the Major when he stabilizes." "I bet they are," Reagan said grimly. "They'll want to know how one of their knights, the embodiment of their precious code, turned into the most efficient killing machine this war has seen." The captain looked uncomfortable. "The reports I've received, they're difficult to believe. Over 600 confirmed brief kills by a single operator. I saw the aftermath at the research facility," Reagan confirmed. "It wasn't combat, it was execution. He didn't just kill them, he systematically eliminated every brief in that complex. Night Command won't like that." "No," Reagan agreed. Their code exists for a reason. When a knight with their training and technology operates without restraint, the results are—" He trailed off, searching for the right word. "Apocalyptic." They both looked down at the unconscious form of Major Elijah Holt. His lips moved slightly, reciting names in his delirium, names of the fallen, names that had driven him beyond the code, beyond humanity, into something else entirely. "What happens to him now?" the captain asked. "That depends," Reagan said, "on whether Knight Holt ever comes back from wherever he's gone. The man in that armor wasn't a knight anymore. He was something new. Something I hope to God we never need again." Elijah's quantum spurs pulsed softly with blue energy, growing stronger as his body fought to heal. Soon they would flare with their full intensity again. Soon he would wake and face the consequences of his actions, the lives he had saved and the code he had abandoned. Whether he could ever fully reclaim his mantle as a Texas knight remained to be seen. For now, the recitation of 35,624 names continued in his dreams, a litany of the dead that had transformed honor into vengeance, restraint into reckoning, a knight into an avenger. Colonel Reagan entered the ship's medical bay for his daily check on the wounded. 5 days had passed since their escape from Talak. Most of the injured were stabilizing, their vitals improving under proper care after months of brief captivity. But one patient remained a constant concern. Reagan approached Holt's bed hesitantly, steeling himself for the sight of the comatose knight hooked to life support systems. Instead, he froze mid-step. Major Elijah Holt was sitting upright, a data tablet balanced on his lap. His fingers moved across the screen with frantic precision, his eyes locked on the display with an intensity that seemed almost feverish. Dangling tubes and monitoring wires had been carelessly pushed aside, some disconnected entirely. "Major?" Reagan approached cautiously. "You shouldn't be—" "Need to document them all," Holt interrupted without looking up. His voice was a rasp, damaged from days of intubation. "Every name, every cause, every debt that needs to be paid." Reagan peered at the tablet screen and felt his blood run cold. Holt had created a meticulous database. Names, ranks, service numbers, dates of death, and most disturbing, detailed descriptions of how each prisoner had died. Lieutenant Winston Wells, 5th Naval Strike Group. Day 98, selected for ceremonial feeding. Commander Vizrak, exsanguination while conscious. PFC Miguel Sanchez, 103rd Infantry. Day 41, stress testing in thermal chamber. Death by hypothermia during tissue sampling. Captain Darius Okoye, Aerospace Defense. Day 127, neural extraction experiment. Survived 16 hours post-procedure. Sergeant Amara Blackwood, 71st Recon Division. Day 203, breeding compatibility trials. Died during forced implantation of brief embryo. Flight Lieutenant Grant Blackwood, 71st Recon Divisio. Day 203, blood replacement experiment. Heart failure after 87% circulatory system replacement with brief fluids. Medical Officer Elena Katri, UNNC Hospital Ship Mercy. Day 76, vivisection to study comparative anatomy. Kept conscious throughout entire 14-hour procedure. The list went on. Thousands of entries already completed, each with clinical precision, but unmistakable fury embedded in every word. "How long have you been awake?" Reagan asked. 17 hours, 22 minutes, Holt answered, still not looking up. "Need to document the worst ones first. The ceremonial feedings, the live dissections, the ones they kept conscious through the procedures." Reagan noticed Holt's quantum spurs were pulsing with an irregular glow, not the characteristic blue of night technology, but a deep, blood red that seemed to throb with each beat of his heart. The medical monitors that remained connected showed vitals that should have been impossible for someone in his condition, a body pushing far beyond human limits. "Major, the doctors need to examine you. Your injuries, your spurs." "They're red. We'll wait," Holt cut him off. 35,624 names. I've documented 7,342 so far. His fingers continued their relentless typing. "Each one needs to be remembered. Each one needs to be avenged." He didn't acknowledge the comment about his spurs, as if their unnatural crimson glow was of no concern. Reagan studied the knight's face. The hollow-eyed prisoner from the camp was gone. So was the vengeance-driven specter who had cut through the brief like a quantum blade. This was something else. Methodical, focused, cold, in a way that made Reagan's combat instincts scream danger. "Holt," Reagan tried again. "Night Command will be here in 2 hours. They've sent a specialized medical team and debriefing officers." For the first time, Holt paused his documentation. "Have they?" His voice remained flat, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "Good. I have something to show them." With sudden fluidity that belied his injuries, Holt reached beneath his medical gown and produced a small metal case. His quantum spurs flared crimson as he opened it, revealing 12 gleaming bullets arranged in precise rows. They appeared to be standard ammunition for a Night-issue sidearm, except for one crucial difference. They shone with the unmistakable luster of pure silver. "What are those?" Reagan asked, though some part of him already knew. "The old ways," Holt replied, lifting one of the silver projectiles and examining it in the harsh medical bay lighting. "The reef are creatures of nightmare, monsters of the night. They drink blood, shun light, hunt in packs. They're vampires, Colonel, just like in the old stories." He placed the bullet back in the case with surgical precision. "I made these myself. Stole a cutting torch from my armor's repair kit, commandeered some hospital equipment when the night shift wasn't looking, melted down a silver medical instrument I found in storage, emptied the powder from my sidearm's existing rounds." Reagan felt a chill run down his spine. "Silver bullets like in the old legends?" "The oldest legends exist for a reason, Colonel." Holt's quantum spurs pulsed blood red in time with his words. "Creatures of the night. Silver through the heart. It's not science. It's not technology. It's primal. It's instinct." "This is insanity, Holt," Regan said, but without conviction. After what he'd witnessed at the research facility, he couldn't discount anything, no matter how outlandish. "Night Command won't approve experimental ammunition based on Earth folklore." "Night Command can approve or disapprove as they please," Holt replied, returning to his documentation. "But I'm going hunting either way." The Night Command delegation arrived precisely on schedule. 3 senior officers in immaculate uniforms, accompanied by a medical team pushing specialized equipment. Their quantum spurs left pristine blue trails across the medical bay floor as they approached Holt's bed. By then, Holt had allowed the doctors to reconnect some of his monitoring equipment, though he'd refused to relinquish his data tablet. He sat upright, his posture perfect despite injuries that should have left him bedridden for weeks. Colonel Reagan stood to the side, watching the encounter with growing unease. "Major Holt," the lead night officer began, "I am Commander Sutton from Night Command Strategic Operations. These are Medical Director Walsh and Special Investigator Reeves. We're here to debrief you on the events at Tulloch and evaluate your status." Holt's face remained impassive. "Of course, Commander." "Before we begin," Sutton continued, "I want to acknowledge that while your actions resulted in the largest POW recovery of the war, they represented significant deviations from the Night Code. This debriefing will address those deviations." "I'm aware of my deviations, Commander," Holt replied, his voice unnervingly calm. "I've documented them alongside my other observations. He gestured to his data tablet. "Would you like to review the case files of 35,624 humans who died while Night Command observed the code?" Sutton's expression tightened. "Major, your tone is inappropriate. You surrendered yourself to enemy forces, already a violation of Night protocols." "What followed was necessary," Holt interrupted, "and will be again." It was then that Commander Sutton noticed the crimson glow emanating from beneath Holt's medical gown. "Major, your quantum spurs." Before Sutton could finish, Holt reached beneath his blanket and produced the metal case. He opened it smoothly, revealing the silver bullets nestled in their compartments. "What is this?" Special Investigator Reeves demanded, leaning forward to examine the ammunition. "The future of our war against the brief," Holt stated, removing one bullet and holding it up. The overhead lights caught the polished silver, sending reflections dancing across the medical bay. Pure silver, hand-forged, for Night sidearms. "Unauthorized ammunition modifications are against regulations," Sutton began, but Medical Director Walsh raised a hand to stop him. "Silver?" Walsh asked, professional curiosity overriding protocol. "Silver?" "Because the brief are vampires," Holt said, tossing the bullet in the air and catching it with unnatural precision. His quantum spurs flared crimson, bathing the room in bloody light. Not metaphorically, literally. Creatures of the night that feed on blood. And like all monsters from the old stories, they have weaknesses. The night officers exchanged glances, their expressions a mixture of concern and disbelief. "Major Holt," Sutton said carefully, "you've experienced severe trauma. Psychological evaluation is standard procedure after extended captivity. These theories suggest you need comprehensive assessment before returning to active duty, if you return at all." Holt's quantum spurs flared suddenly, the red glow intensifying until it cast everyone's shadow against the walls. "I spent 6 months watching them feed, watching them drain humans dry while their victims remained conscious, watching them perform rituals with the blood. They don't just kill, Commander. They feast, they worship. They're monsters wearing the skin of soldiers." He leaned forward, the movement predatory. "But I understand your skepticism. That's why I've arranged a demonstration." "A demonstration?" Walsh echoed. "Colonel Reagan has been kind enough to allow me access to a secured laboratory on this vessel," Holt explained. "I've prepared Bree's remains for testing. You'll see the reaction for yourselves." Reagan shifted uncomfortably as all eyes turned to him. He hadn't explicitly authorized Holt's experimentation, but he hadn't stopped it either. After witnessing the night's efficiency at the research facility, contradicting him seemed unwise. "This is highly irregular," Sutton protested. "So is losing a war against creatures that shouldn't exist," Holt countered, closing the case with a decisive click. "We have to kill every last one of those vampires, and I've got an old theory to test out." He tossed another silver bullet in his hand, the motion casual but the intent behind it anything but. "The question, Commander, is whether Night Command will join me in this hunt, or if I'll need to proceed alone." The challenge hung in the air between them. For a moment, Reagan thought Sutton might order Holt's immediate detention. Instead, the commander's quantum spurs pulsed once, a brief acknowledgement between nights. "Show us your evidence, Major," Sutton said. "Then we'll discuss your hunt." Holt's lips curved in what might have been a smile on another man. On him, it looked like a predator baring its teeth. "With pleasure, Commander." He rose from the bed with fluid grace that belied his injuries, the silver bullet still dancing between his fingers. It's time the Knights learned how to kill monsters. As they left the medical bay, Reagan caught a glimpse of Holt's data tablet, still displaying his meticulous documentation of the dead. The screen had changed to a new section titled simply, "The Hunter's Handbook." Beneath it was a single line of text. "For the 35,624, No mercy, no quarter, no survivors. Reagan shivered, not from cold but from certainty. Knight Command had come to reclaim one of their own, to bring a rogue element back under the code. Instead, they were about to create something new. Holt, the vampire slayer, was about to be born. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to leave this video a like and subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this. Video shares, memberships, and super thanks help the channel grow as well, so feel free to partner with this channel in that way as we grow. With that all said, thank you again for listening to the story, and thank you for your time. On the left side of your screen are some videos I think you might be interested in. I hope to see you in the next one.